Ever since the creation of man, God has chosen to use man to fulfill his purposes in the world. And because of that, and because of the free will that God gave us, man also has the ability to not choose God's purposes, God's plan, and God's best. So we see that now worked out every day. So no, it's not God's will that children are shot up in schools. It's not God's will that people are abused, that women are abused. It's not God's will that people are all the horrible things that happen. It is not God's will, but man has free will and has a choice. And so I want to tie that concept to the idea of prophecy. In every prophecy, especially right now, modern day prophecy, but it was true then, it's always been true, that there is contingency on God's will and desire, even on prophecy. And we see the word if used so many times throughout the major and minor prophets in the Old Testament. Really the only person where it wasn't a question that there would be ultimate perfect obedience to the will of God was in the person of Jesus. Because of his perfection, God knew that Jesus would follow perfectly the will of the Lord. And so every prophecy of Jesus was fulfilled exactly as Father God in heaven desired it to be fulfilled. But when it comes to prophecy about men's life, women's lives, there is always contingency. The contingency is always obedience. I was reading this morning in 1 Chronicles 28, verse 9. This is a word of the Lord that David spoke over his son Solomon as he was initiating this next phase of basically turning over the building of the temple of the Lord to house the Ark of the Covenant to Solomon and Solomon's reign. And so we see a prophecy over Solomon, 1 Chronicles 28:9. David says from the Lord, he says, if you seek him, God, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will forsake you. Essentially, if you forget him, if you forsake him, he will forget you. If you seek him, you will find him. There's a contingency. In the word if, we cannot get around. Those tiny two little letters, I-F, if. We are always living with the contingency of God's blessing and promises and fulfillment of his desire, his plan for us. Prophecy spoken over us from leaders, from friends, from people who hear the voice of the Lord. There's always a contingency on those prophecies. Those prophecies are never, this will be completed no matter what you do. Within prophecy, there is either explicit or implicit contingency. If you obey, if you stay righteous before the Lord, if you follow, if you surrender, if you say yes. And we know from every story in the Bible that it's possible to say no. And it's possible to not fulfill God's desire, God's best for our lives. So just keep that in mind as you both deliver prophetic words and receive prophetic words. Even if the word if is not used, you can even basically work that in. There's always a contingency. There's always if we follow, if we obey, if we adhere to the word of the Lord.